real fast.
In 1,000 feet.
Okay, I guess I'll go
Turn
first.
Yeah, please. Everyone, this is Lorinda. Watch out. She's going to take over the Roswell market now.
Hi, Lorinda.
Hi. I feel the pressure now.
No, we're just making sure everyone's going to support your goals. No
All right.
pressure. It's all for your benefit.
So yesterday on the phone call, I mentioned that I was going through my phone and picking out the people who I hadn't reached out to, who I put in my phone as potential buyers, because when they called in, I put buyer next to their name. So
Okay.
last night I was able to upload those into Command.
Awesome. Okay, so it sounds like you might be taking an early lead at the at our bold contest. Is that right?
Yes.
Does everyone know what the bold contest is? What's the bold contest, y'all? Somebody tell me.
We had someone, the winner would have to put in at least 100, and then everyone else would put in 50.
You're close. So the winner, okay. So first of all, it's all about database ads. Okay, all about database ads. And today is actually the last day. And you have to post the results today too. So as long as 10 people report 50 database ads or more in the final week, the final tab for September, as long as 10 people have a minimum of 50, as long as the highest one, the highest number of people, or the person that added the most number of people to the database, as long as they did 100, we'll take the bold for free. Okay. So so two things have to happen. Number one is you need to be over 100, and then you need to cheer on your colleagues and our peers to make sure that at least 9 other people are above 50. Sound good? I'm not aware of a single person that's over 50, by the way. So y'all better get to work if you want Candace and I to pay for your bold ticket. Fair?
Okay.
Okay. Who wants to, any other people? Thank you, Lorinda, for sharing that. Who else wants to share some good news or something they've learned in the last couple of days?
Hey, Bill, I've got one.
Yeah, please.
There was this buyer who wanted Margaret's house, and he was super upset that he didn't get it. He actually called me personally, not his agent. And I was telling him, I was like, well, you know, and this was directly from Candace talking yesterday about, or somebody was about, you know, looking at expired or looking at houses that have been on the market for over 7 days or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I just told him, I was like, you know, well, you know, for my buyers, some that are really need to move quickly, or they're just not interested in the you know, the rat race or the bidding war. You know, we look for houses that are that have just recently reduced their price, or that have been on the market for like 2 or 3 weeks. You know, we start our search there. So he's like, well, you know, maybe I should have you as my agent.
Nice. Okay.
So so I think actually I got a call scheduled with him tonight, and we're going to talk about exactly what he's looking for. So hopefully I can be his agent.
Okay, so you got a couple of very important gray areas there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. He does have an active agency agreement with someone
well,
else.
He actually, he told me he wasn't. He had it was like a one and done thing with him, with that agent. So he's not tied to that agent at all.
So all of your questions should be along the lines of, what are you looking for? Why is that important?
Mm-hmm.
Right. What questions do you plan to ask the agent that you will ultimately hire? Right. What are you waiting to hear or waiting to learn from the particular agent that you're going to hire? And, you know, how will you know that you found that person? You may want to draw out a little bit of negativity from them a little bit. And you can do that by saying, you know, tell me about experiences that you've had with real estate agents in the past. Right. And then he'll tell you all the things that you better not do.
Yep.
Right. So here's a good thought is anybody that doesn't have a relationship with a realtor that owns a piece of property has had a bad experience with a realtor. Okay. Or one that was not memorable enough to reach back out to that person.
Right.
So the key question is why? right? What happened? What did you wish happened that didn't happen? What did you expect that you didn't get? What were you led to believe would happen that didn't happen? And why aren't you calling that person now?
Right.
Right. So if they've had, if that's happened, which is, guys, over 90% of homeowners out there right now, okay, it's your key to say, hey, I'd love the opportunity to earn the right to work together. You know, what would that look like? What would you expect your realtor to do in order to prove themselves as somebody that's worthy of this awesome opportunity?
Right.
Right. And meanwhile, you're kind of putting them up on a pedestal a little bit, right? And complimenting them at the same time. Go after that thing, man. Good job.
Yeah.
Good job.
And he needs to move quick. So it would be like that. It would be great. Could use it.
Okay. Well, again, remind him about the market. Give him some suggestions on how to be successful as a buyer in an incredibly strong seller's market, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right, I want to do a tiny bit of housekeeping really fast. Great job, Michael. Bold, bold, bold. Okay, we have posted this in the chat a few days ago. I can post it again if you guys would like. There is a discount, or there is the regular price, so to speak, is $7.99. It will go up in 2 weeks. And there's been some information put out there on the daily newsletter for the details on the rebate and the like team meeting where you're going to get to know Tammy. Tammy is going to be the coach. Okay. Any questions on bold at all? Oh yeah, don't forget about our incentive there. Is that what you were going to tell everyone about, Candace?
No, I was going to say, no matter what, be sure to go to bold first step, which is complimentary. And if you give me if you want to text me your name, I'll make sure that you get registered. Melody has volunteered to help with that. So that's October 13th. If you can all sign up for bold, sign up for bold. There are also scholarships out there. So if you need more information about that, just let one of us know and we'll get you hooked up.
Thank you. Okay, so let's review our reimbursement plan. You pay the $8.99, or I'm sorry, $7.99 for the program. Okay, when you pinned deals that go binding between October 13th and January 13th, so that's 3 months. If you put anything under contract between those 2 dates, then the first deal that closes, you'll get $200 back from the Market Center. The second deal that closes, you'll get $200 back from the Market Center, and that's the deal. Because you're in productivity and you've made a commitment to yourself and to your family and to your business, Candace and I are going to offer the third transaction $200 back, and then the fourth transaction $200 back out of our money. Fair?
Very nice.
Any questions on that? I'm telling you guys, I literally learned, I went to Bold for the first time a couple months after I joined Keller Williams, which was like almost 11 years ago. And I heard something in the first probably 20 minutes of the very first Bold session that I went to. I used that exact phrase later that night and put a $400,000 something home under contract. So Bold has officially been paid for the rest of my life. And I've gone a bunch of times, right? So if you've gone in the past and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't, and now you feel like you don't have to go, that's a bunch of nonsense. You need to be in the room. Okay? You need to be in the room. Cool? If you got some stresses around that, some financial stresses around that, come talk to me. Obviously, we'll keep that confidential and we will work overtime to help you. Okay?
And I just want to say, if your mindset is, oh, you know, if your mindset is around, well, I've taken it and I don't want to spend the money this time, just keep them. And maybe you don't have the confidence that you're going to put deals in contract. That's a self-limiting belief. So we need to talk about that if that's how you're feeling.
Well, most of the people in the room today are the opposite, which is their thought is not necessarily, I'm assuming this, I took Bold, 6 months ago, I don't need to take it again. Most people in the room are either what's Bold or I might be too new for Bold. And I got to tell you, there's some people that probably disagree with this. I think you should be in the room. I don't care if you got your license 25 minutes ago. It's about thinking differently. Okay. It's not work and then bold on top of it. Bold is a framework for work, right? It's a framework for speaking to people and learning. It's not a second job. It's all the same stuff. We're learning and we're speaking to people. Make sense? Okay. So today I had, today and tomorrow really, my topic or my idea was to go through contracts. And I know that 2 45-minute morning huddles on contracts is a bit of a drop in the bucket. And we can certainly spend more time on it in the future. But I want to make this time as practical and as important as possible for those that have committed their morning to us. So first of all, thank you. Would you guys just take a quick moment and let me know if I were to say, Anthony, contracts. I want you to tell me the very thing that is giving you the most stress or the very thing you are the most uncertain about. Let's just do since we got a little bit of a small group today, and that'll help me know what we can talk about today. Although I have a plan in case nobody wants anything. I want to make sure that we're talking about the right stuff over the next couple of days. So why don't we start with Markia?
Oh, okay.
I've given you an extra second. I didn't want you to feel like I put you on the spot.
Oh, no worries.
All right, Markia, what do you want to learn?
Say that one more time, Bill.
If I were to say, I'll teach you anything you want to know about contracts, what's the first thing that pops into your mind is something that you are either not so confident about or have a lot of questions around, or that you've never really understood, or that you need help with?
I think really probably the financing part of the contracts
Okay.
can be confusing at times, depending on situations where, depending on if you're putting a contract in over the weekend and, you're doing the financing contingency about the appraisal contingency or either the financing. Like in my eyes, I feel like, oh, financing contingency, if you have a good job, this and that and the other, we can waive it. But I feel like, it's deeper than that. So I would definitely say financing when it comes to contracts.
Great, thank you, thank you. Okay, let's go, we'll go around the room quickly. So Stacy.
I'm so new. I would love to start with how to get to them.
Okay.
Where, well, when you're new, I feel like there are about 1,000 places to go for all the different information. So it gets, I don't know if everyone has felt like this, but overwhelming to know where to go to get what quickly, because I feel like it's just starting with exactly where. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anthony.
Okay, back. Sorry about that. Basically with contracts, my concern or my not weakness, is the stipulations, special steps, in the contracts, just some of the jargon, to help, win a contract.
Beautiful. Okay. Lorinda.
Everyone has pretty much touched what I'm needing assistance with. The first being sure on how to fill out those appraisal and financial contingencies accurately. And then that'll be a start, because the young gentleman that just spoke mentioned something else. So both of those two are my concern, but the contingencies are my biggest run through right now.
Okay, beautiful. Chemo.
I have the same as Lorinda and Anthony.
All right, beautiful. Okay, Jenny. Michael.
So just going through, having just gone through one, and we're binding now, I had a couple questions about like for one, like who signs who fills in the part when you go binding, and a few other little back and forth things like who does what when, and maybe that could be answered, while you're talking about other stuff. But that was just, I had some, and thankfully, Candace was very nice to walk me through those and sort of coached me. But you know, just in general, you know, who does what when you're going back and forth, you know, to get to binding.
All right, beautiful. Candace, are you seeing, are people asking you anything in particular in kind of a, are you noticing any trends, or are you noticing any forms or discussion points that we should address as well?
No, I think it's mostly just per transaction, the specifics of the transaction and how to strategize around it.
Okay, cool. All right, let's start. Thank you. Let's this is some good framework. The 3 documents that I had prepared with my assistant to review today were not brought up, so I'm going to stall for 2 seconds while she pulls up a couple. So let's talk about.
Hey, Bill, can I add one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Because I had 2 people from PC call me one time in regards to the earnest money, and they thought that they could collect earnest money beforehand to show that their clients were really interested, versus like you have to be binding in order to collect the earnest money.
Well, there's always going to have to be some earnest money. So like showing the
right, but they were asking from their clients prior to the contract being accepted.
Oh, I mean, that is it's possible. That might be something that you consider doing with like an out-of-town person, right?
Yeah,
that you might not
I'd call
see.
that more proactive than anything else for the buyer agent. I don't think there's a problem with it. It's,
Oh,
you know, maybe they don't want to go back to the guy's house to pick up the check. You know?
That's exactly right. But I don't think it's going to like make that buyer stand out, because the earnest money is in the agent's hand rather than not. It will be in the agent's hand in 3 days or something. Okay, we'll talk about earnest money too. Cool. All right, let's just kind of let's move to Stacy's comment first. So there's a lot in the weekly email that I have sent out. I have a number of basically every video on the YouTube channel. You could search appraisal, special steps, financing, contingencies, contracts, you know, negotiations, all that kind of stuff. So I want to let you guys know there are tons and tons of resources of videos that we've done about all of these topics. But for those that are new and those that need to hear it again or hear it from a different person, we're going to go through it all again. Okay. So first of all, we want to make sure that you have DocuSign and Command connected. Okay. The instructions for that can be found on In Command with Sam. Candace, you're in front of your computer, right? Will you just pop a couple of these websites into the chat as I'm throwing them out there, please?
Yep.
So In Command with Sam is Sam Jackson is our Director of Innovation and Technology for the Georgia Legacy Group. And he has a YouTube channel that is just got a ton of tutorials and tips and strategies and all that kind of stuff. So that's a great place to start, In Command with Sam, if you have kind of the more on the tech side, you know, like getting Command and DocuSign linked. So that will allow you to, it's incommandwithsam.com is the quick link to it. So that will help you get access to all the documents. What I would do
So Bill, I want to make sure I understand. You said to connect DocuSign and Command is your first step?
Yeah.
DocuSign and Command. Okay.
So if you go into Command and I'm trying to remember what the applet is. There's probably some instructions. I'm almost certain there's instructions in your Getting Started book that Raven gives you at orientation.
Right. I was going to say that that's gone over during orientation. And I'm sure if you have a problem with it, you can just call up Raven and have her walk you right through it.
100%. Takes 2 seconds. You do have to be a member of a board of realtors in order to get something called a NERDS number, which is something they ask you for during the integration. Then you'll print out the most relevant contracts. I've also spoken about what those are. I'll kind of run through some of those real fast. Purchase and sale agreement, financing contingency. Those are generally VA loan exhibit, FHA loan exhibit, conventional loan exhibit. Okay. The Disclosures: seller's property disclosure, community association disclosure, lead-based paint disclosure. Those are probably the 3 biggest disclosures. Okay. And then let's see.
What was the second one? You said purchase and sell and then something and then disclosures.
Okay, so let's back up 1 second. Let's say we're going to put together an offer. Okay, here are
Yes.
the components of an offer. The first thing is you have the pre-approval letter. Okay, you get that from the lender. And that is just a document that basically says, hey, Michael Gould, we've reviewed Michael Gould's financial profile, and we have determined that he is eligible for a conventional loan, 10% down payment, up to 450 or whatever it is. Okay, so that's there. The next thing is the purchase and sale agreement. Okay, we're going to go through all this stuff in detail, but the purchase and sale agreement. The next kind of part, if you will, of the offer is how is the money, where's the money coming from, right? So that would be either the FHA loan exhibit, if they're doing an FHA loan, VA loan exhibit, conventional loan exhibit, or the all cash exhibit. So you're basically telling the seller, where's the money coming from? Is it a mortgage or is it cash? The next section, if you will, is all the disclosures, right? So a seller's property disclosure, if the property was built prior to 1978, there'll be a lead-based paint disclosure. And then there'll also be a community association disclosure if the home has an HOA, okay? Even if they don't, sometimes even if they don't have any fees, right? There may be things like, you know, $100 yearly donation to pay for like the Christmas party and to maintain the flowers outside the sign or something, right? So it's, even if you're not paying, you know, $400, $600, $800 a year for the HOA, doesn't necessarily mean that there's not rules and regulations. So you got to go through a little bit of research to confirm that, yes or no. Okay, that is basically the kind of the order of the offer. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are familiar with all those documents, right? So I would, once I get Command and DocuSign integrated, I would download blank copies of all those documents and start reading them page by page by page. Okay, and let's say you start with the conventional loan exhibit. You read it through, you highlight the things you don't understand, you write the questions on the side of it that are unclear, right? You can watch a video that we've done in the past where I explain it, or you can come to Candace or I or whoever and say, hey, let me give you 2 scenarios, and then I'll let you guess which one I prefer. Okay. The first scenario is, hey, I'm new to the business and I'm expecting to get paid at some point. And I've never seen a closing that has ever happened in the history of real estate without contracts first, right? Candace, you've been in the business over 20 years. Have you ever seen that?
Mm-mm.
Me either. Okay, so you're going to have to work through contracts if you ever want to get paid. So you got 2 choices. You can either go through contracts today when you perhaps don't have an immediate need for, you know, somebody breathing down your neck to fill it out. We got to get this deadline hit, and wife's running, hey, you're late for dinner. And the kids are like, hey, daddy, you didn't put me to sleep tonight. You know, we either get a chance to prepare or we get a chance to kind of do it on the fly and everything turns into chaoticness. Is that a word? Chaos. Okay. So my recommendation is, if you're unfamiliar with these contracts in any way, you need to study them before there's a deadline. Okay. Because ideally you should be able to explain, oh, I'm sorry, the other 2 documents, of course, they're not part of the offer, but they definitely need to be included in the list, is a seller's listing agreement, exclusive seller listing agreement, and the exclusive buyer agency agreement or buyer brokerage agreement. Okay. You ought to be able to explain these contracts, right?
And I just wanted to add the affiliated business disclosure.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yes. We didn't have to do that a long time ago. And the affiliated business disclosure, regardless of whether you're using those vendors or not, like O'Kelly and Campbell and, you know, 210 and these kind of things, right? Okay, so print those off and review them. If you're unclear on
What were the 2? Sorry, I'm trying to make notes on the seller. What were the 2 seller agreement? What was that? The 2 seller ones.
Actually, there's one of each. So exclusive seller agency agreement or seller listing agreement. That is what you would sign when you're when you're going under contract, or when you're confirming your client relationship with the seller. And then the buyer's version of that is the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
So you would only ever need one of those. You don't never need both unless you're doing both sides of the deal, but that won't happen for a while.
Well, it could.
Yeah.
It could. I mean, I would approach
It's my
Aubrey.
dream scenario.
You know, it's challenging, I'll be honest with you, but it's possible. Dual agency in Georgia is legal. You do need to get permission from Aubrey though. Okay.
On
So-
those brokerage agreements, are they on their GAR forms or are
Yeah,
they,
are.
Everything I mentioned is a GAR form.
Except for the
Okay.
Oh, except
for
for the what do you call it? The
Affiliated business.
yeah, Candace just said.
whatever. That's
the
Okay.
affiliated business comes from the market center?
No, so
Yeah.
that's a document that basically alerts all the parties that there is a financial relationship between our market center and a number of vendors.
Oh, yeah, I heard you on that, but you get the form from who?
It's
It's
in
not a GAR
command.
form.
It's in command. It actually, like,
Command.
it says like FMLS forms and GAR forms, and then
Okay.
like Keller Williams Realty Consultants forms. That's where that's at. Michael, so in your in your situation, there would never be a in the same physical transaction. The only reason you'd have to have both of those agreements signed is if you were serving as the dual agent.
right.
However, I mean, we will all experience ideally times where we have a seller contract for when we're helping a particular seller. Then when the house is sold or prior to the house being sold, you also have a buyer agency
Oh.
contract with them as you're representing the buyer.
That's true.
Okay. Okay, beautiful. So that's the initial research piece. The other option, by the way, is you finally get a buyer, you finally get a seller, and you call us at 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday and expect us to spend 3 hours with you explaining this stuff. That's my second choice. Okay. Is that fair to say? Are the other ones not, are y'all laughing too?
Yes. Sorry.
Yes. I'm
Okay.
laughing.
So let's get in the game, right? We know we got to learn these pieces of these contracts to get paid. There's 40-something thousand realtors in town. The majority of them can explain contracts. You need to be part of that group. Okay.
And Go ahead,
I was just going to say, Ignite is a great place to learn these things too.
Yes, Ignite is just starting, or it starts in like a week or something. Okay. And if you go to our Google Drive, Ignite 2.0, all the curriculum and all the videos and all the handouts are in our Google Drive. Okay. All of it.
So your stuff in Ignite 2.0 is the exact, like it's updated as to what Melba's doing now.
Actually, I think Melba is kind of teaching a blend of 1.0 and 2.0. But you remember that Ignite, like
Yeah, I thought she
2.0
made
that
changes.
you would see on our Google Drive, that is not, like, they're not going to talk about GAR forms on there, right? Because it's a national curriculum basically. So you'll get the kind of the national piece, but in terms of like learning the specifics of the Georgia contracts or the specifics of, you know, the way closings happen and these kind of things, you're going to need that from either us, of course, or Ignite with Melba. Okay.
Okay, I'm taking that this month, so that'll help.
That's great,
Beautiful.
Stacy.
That's
Hey,
exactly-
one more plug for Melba. She's been or is still on the forms committee for GAR. So there is nobody that understands these forms better than Melba, and she's really good at explaining them.
Yeah, maybe Pam.
Well, yeah.
They're tied.
And I just want to add that most of you, when you call, you have specific questions, or maybe it's your first time writing a contract and you just want the support of knowing that you're doing it correctly. That's fine. That is fine. It's I haven't really experienced very often when somebody calls and really hasn't had any preparation at all. So I wanted to add that in and congratulate all of you because I think you're doing it right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Candace has held my hand a few times, and it has been greatly appreciated.
Well, it was
But you're-
greatly appreciated, Michael. I'm going to assume something about you. It was
Yeah.
greatly appreciated that you came to the table with, hey, I've watched this video and I learned this, but I'm a little unclear what you said at this moment, and that impacts the way I filled that out. Did I fill that out properly? Right.
Exactly. Michael's always prepared.
So there's a difference between those that are willing to do the self-study and the other type of person just drops their problems on us, types of people. Is that fair to say?
I missed that whole last part because you were
Oh.
frozen. Sorry.
I'm trying to get this. Hang on one second, guys. Ugh. Okay, there we go. You guys see me now?
There we go. Yep.
What I was saying is there's two types of agents. One will prepare, right? One will prepare and come to us with very specific questions because they've gone to a contracts class or taken Ignite or something like that. And then they just, like Candace just said, they want a second set of eyes on the paperwork, right? Totally get that. The other set of people will just come and have no preparation, attend no sessions, and then expect us to be available when it's perfectly convenient for them. That's our second choice. Okay, we're here to help you, but please take some time to really work through this paperwork. Okay, this is the way deals happen. Okay, let's talk about the conventional loan exhibit for 1 second. Okay, actually, I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to talk about just kind of theoretically for just a second around the financing side. Okay. When your buyer is speaking to a lender, I think that most people will not teach you this. Okay. Your buyer has got to get a page that they call the loan worksheet. Okay. Different bankers or different lenders might call it something different, but it is essentially an estimate of what's called a good faith estimate, which details all of the charges that a buyer is going to face when they buy the home and when they obtain financing to buy the home. Okay, and it will state what their closing costs are, what their escrows are, what their cash to close is, etc. Okay. Especially in this environment where it's very odd for a buyer to get closing cost assistance, they need to understand that in addition to having the money for the down payment, they've also got to have the money for the closing cost. And the closing cost in many instances are 2 to 3% of the sales price. So if they're buying a $500,000 house, I mean, the closing cost could easily be over 10 grand. Okay. And if they're, rolling quarters to get their down payment and they can't get the seller to pay for their closing costs, which is likely not going to happen, they may not be in a position to buy. And you don't want to figure that out the day before the financing contingency is up, right? They need to be aware of what their exposure is going to be before they even submit an offer. Does that make sense? So I'm having conversations with buyers on the front end saying, hey, have you seen the loan worksheet that your lender gave you for the pre-qualification numbers that they shared with you, right? They told you could buy a $500,000 house, but assuming that you do buy a $500,000 house, are you familiar with what your escrows are going to be, what your closing costs are going to be, and what your cash to close is going to be? And how do you feel about that? Do you have any reservations? Right? And that will help me understand how likely this person is to sit at a closing table with me. Make sense? Okay, so it is our job. Remember, it is our job not to make decisions for our clients, but to give them all the information they need to be able to make decisions for themselves. Okay, and we share with them concerns we might have, or we share with them tips and strategies that we might think of to help them through that process. So it's super important that, especially if you're going out for the first time on the weekend, you've got to have a conversation with the buyer's lender. Got to say, hey, I'm going shopping with these people and they're probably going to find something that they want and they're probably going to want to move forward. And I need to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And basically you're interviewing the lender for the buyer in some ways. Now you don't have so much control over who they pick, but I'm going to tell you something. If they pick somebody that's lousy, I'm going to make sure they know the person they chose is lousy, because I only want to play with A players. And if I can't get their lender on the telephone before we have a deadline, Wait to see how stressful it's going to be once you have deadlines. Right? And I'm telling you, if the lender is good, everything works great. If the lender is bad, the entire transaction is a chaotic mess. Okay. The lender is probably your most important person in the transaction. All right. So let's just go through the conventional loan exhibit today, and I'll help you understand a little bit about how to fill this in. Can everyone see this? Okay. This exhibit is a part of the agreement with the offer date of. All the offer dates need to match. This is particularly important when you start sending offers on different properties, and you have an old conventional loan exhibit from the previous offer that didn't work. You just got to make sure everything is tidy. Remember, you're auditioning to be the co-op agent every time you're communicating with the seller. If you're on the buyer side, which in this scenario we are, okay? If you're a hot mess every time you talk to the seller's agent, they're not going to choose you. Okay. So if your contracts are sloppy, they're going to say, oh my gosh, this whole transaction is going to be sloppy. This person has no clue what they're doing. Make sense? So if you're thinking to yourself, hey, if I was asked to write this contract today, would it be sloppy or would it be perfect? And if the answer is anything other than perfect, you need to print this out, fill it out, send it to Candace or I, and say, did I do this right? Because no more are we going to accept that. Is that fair? All right. Then you list the property address right below it. Okay. Application. This is a very, this is probably one of the most misunderstood parts of the contract. Okay. In the section first mortgage, you are not necessarily telling them exactly the type of loan you're telling them the type of loan you're getting, but that doesn't commit you to that interest rate, and that doesn't commit you to that type of loan. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say, for example, the person is getting a 20% down loan. Okay, so they're taking an 80% loan and they're bringing 20% in cash. Okay, if that was the case, we would check the A box, and the loan amount would be 80% of the purchase price. Generally speaking, the term would be 30 years. The interest rate is not the interest rate necessarily that they're being quoted. It's the interest rate that is protected within the contract. I'll come back to that. The next thing is rate type. Most likely it's going to be fixed. And source of loans, most likely it's going to be institutional. Okay, institutional would be your traditional banker or broker or something like that, right? Seller would be a seller finance loan, which we hardly ever see anymore. Okay, and other would be like a personal loan or a from somebody other than the seller, or like a hard money loan or something like that. Okay, so what I mean by that is, let's say that I'm filling out this contract for a buyer and I submit it off to the seller, and I put 3% down there as the interest rate. That's not, again, that's not telling the seller that I'm going to take a loan at 3%. It's telling the seller that if I cannot get a loan for 3% or less, then I'm not obligated to buy the home. So if I'm on the seller side, I don't want that number to be all that low. I like it when it reads market, meaning I don't care what the interest rate market is, that is not going to be an excuse for you leaving this deal. Or if they don't understand that, or they're not willing to agree to that, I want that number to be a good bit higher than that, than what the rate is today. I'd want it to read like 5% or something, right? If you put 2.5% on there and you accept that as a seller, that means if they go to get the loan and they can't, and let's say the quote of the day is 2 3/4, they could be like, hey, I can't get the 2.5 loan, I'm out. And I'm taking their earnest money. Does that make sense? So again, that's an example of why it might be 1 if you're working with the buyer and 1 if you're working with the seller. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. Now, section 2, this is where you put the name of the lender that is able to provide the term or the denial letter. Okay, let's say, for example, oh wait, before I go there, let me say one more thing. So let's say that this person fills out this and they're going on into the contract and everything's going smoothly. Okay, then the appraisal happens. And the appraisal does not support this contract sales price. So this guy, let's say he's buying a $100,000, or I'm sorry, a $500,000 house. So remember, he would be getting a $400,000 loan and bringing $100,000 in cash. Everyone follow me? Okay, so let's say that the home appraises for, let's say, 480 and it can't be resolved. Okay, yet the buyer wants to continue to move forward. They would be able to use some of that 20% down payment to make up the difference, and therefore they might put 15% down and use that other 5% to offset the low appraisal. Okay, if they were to do that and get denied for that loan, they would have a problem. So basically, if you were to stray from what you state here, you're essentially foregoing your financing contingency. It doesn't say you can't do it. It just says you're no longer protected if you were to get a denial letter. Here's a good example of when you might consider allowing there to be no financing contingency. Okay, a lot of lenders right now are underwriting the whole file. So they've looked at the person's bank statements and pay stubs and tax returns and all that stuff. They see that the person has a verifiable income. And this might be in particular with business owners or real estate agents or these kind of people who are, their income is basically claimed, if you will, by what is put on their tax return, right? So like when I bought not this last one, but the home before, I was buying well within my price range. Okay. I had already, filed my taxes. I was an independent contractor, so I wasn't worried about losing my job. And nothing was going to change because the tax returns they were looking at were the ones that are already in the past, right? It was multiple offers. It was actually off-market multiple offers. And so I said, I don't need a financing contingency. It doesn't mean I'm not getting a loan. It doesn't mean that I'm perfect. It means that I was willing to take the risk. Follow me? So if a seller says, hey, well, what about the financing contingency? Can you lower that or can you get rid of that? That's a risk that you potentially could take if there's not going to be anything substantial that could change in their financial world, right? But if they have a real job, like a W-9 job, or what do you call it? W-9 job, W-2 job, right? See, it's been a long time since I've had one of those. Thank God, right? And they're going to call like the morning of the closing and say, hey, is Joe still work there? Right? That I would be less likely to take that risk there. Okay. So you gotta, it's all risk, right? So you can not have one of these in the contract. It is more risky for the buyer, but it could make you win, right? It could cause your offer to stand out. All right. My advice for number 2 is to leave that blank. Okay, leave that blank. What that tells you is that you can obtain a denial letter from any lender you want. You're not forced to get a denial letter from the person that gave you the pre-qual. You're not forced to do a denial letter from somebody that the seller wanted you to talk to or whatever. You leave it blank, you can receive a denial letter for anything, from anyone, I should say. Okay. Now, I am not, you need to read this still. I'm just giving you the highlights. Okay. Section number 5, financing contingency. What this is telling us is the number of days that you would be able to leave the contract with a denial letter and still retain your earnest money. Okay. Generally speaking, if I was giving this session 2 years ago, I would have said this is generally around 21 to 25 days. I would say that this is probably more like 14 days or so now. Is that what you guys are experiencing?
Yes.
Okay. So your file is most likely, the buyer's file is most likely not going to be fully underwritten within 14 days. Okay. Meaning there will not be a clear to close within 14 days. So the risk that you're taking is if Joe gets fired on day 17, he probably is not going to be able to buy the home, and therefore he's probably going to lose his earnest money. Okay. But by 14 days, there should at least be what's called a conditional approval, meaning the whole loan package has gone through the underwriters, and the underwriters have basically said, we are willing to issue this loan as long as these 6 things happen. And once you see what those 6 things are, and what when the lender sees what those 6 things are, they will be able to determine whether that stresses them out or not, right? So one of those things might be a gift letter from a relative who supported, is helping chip in for the down payment. Or it could be a, an explanation from, Comcast saying, hey, it was an error. We actually didn't loan you, the stuff, and we can take that off of the, credit file or whatever, right? Or it could be, hey, we need to double check your last pay stub immediately prior to closing to make sure you still work there. Or, hey, we need a suitable insurance policy, right? So it could be things that are all achievable, or it could be things that are like, whoa, we got a problem here. If you got a problem, you need to get that denial letter issued prior to the end of those days. And that's calendar days, holidays included, weekends included. Okay. Everyone with me? Okay, so when that contract goes binding, you need to make sure all these deadlines are put on your calendar so that they're not overlooked. And by the way, you don't want to be alerted that your financing contingency is up today, right? Because there's not much you can do about it today. You need to be alerted about it a week before, 2 weeks before, or you need to be in constant communication with the lender. Hey, how we doing? Hey, just as a reminder, 11 days away from the financing contingency. Have you found anything that causes you concern? Anything I can do to help you? Make sense? Okay. Any questions thus far? If you were not going to take a financing contingency, so to speak, then you just put 0 here. Okay. Now, again, the only reason why you should consider doing that is because there is you're trying to make your offer stand out from the rest of the people. Okay. This is also the document which includes the appraisal contingency. That's what number 11 is right here. Okay. So again, 2 years ago, I would have said 21 to 25 days there. Now we're seeing, a week sometimes, or 2 weeks sometimes, right? So get in touch with your buyer's lender and say, obviously, we're trying to be as competitive as possible. Obviously, we both want to protect our client, right? Our borrower / buyer. So how quickly can your team get this appraisal done and back to us? Because if you can do it in 12 days, I don't want to put 15. And if you can do it in 11 days, I'd rather put 11 than 12. So give me the number. Right. And if they're like, well, we don't really know, like we got it. Wrong answer. We need to find another lender. I'm looking for A players. Does that make sense? I know I'm being a little in your face right now. Smart business people need to be that way. Okay. They need to pair with smart people that can get the job done. This business is hard enough. I want A player partners. Fair? Okay. Nowadays, I'd say that's probably anywhere from 10 to 14 days, but you better double check with your lender to make sure that that is reasonable. Okay. Let's just take 2 seconds to explain the appraisal contingency overall. Okay. Let's say the contract sales price is 500. The person is getting an 80% loan, meaning they're going to borrow 400. They're going to bring 100,000. Okay. Now the appraiser is hired by the buyer's lender, and the role of that person is to substantiate the sales price by giving their opinion of value on that day. Okay, so they are not the buyer, they're not the seller. They're giving theoretically an objective viewpoint of the value of the home, right? In reality, the value is what a willing seller and what a willing buyer agree to exchange the property for. Okay, but we know that sometimes buyers seem to be overpaying in some instances for property in an effort to win. The appraiser's just coming in to make sure that's not crazy. Because if that buyer were to buy the home, never make a payment, The bank wants to know that they could sell it and not take a bath. Make sense? Okay, so the appraisal comes in. Let's do a few scenarios. Appraisal comes in at 500,000 on the nose. We're good. As a buyer's agent, you just reach out to the seller or seller's agent and say, hey, wanted to let you know all's good with the appraisal. We're moving forward. They don't need to see the copy of the appraisal. They don't need to know the number. It's none of their business. Makes sense? They're like, hey, just send over the appraisal. Say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. It's not personal. You just don't get it. You didn't pay for it. You're not a party to it. It's good. We're moving forward. See it closing. Okay. Especially that's the case if the appraisal comes in higher, right? So let's say I'm the buyer, Anthony is the seller, and my appraisal comes in at, let's say, 540, and I'm under contract to buy it for 500. And I'm the buyer's agent. I don't know any different. So I get the appraisal, I send it over to the other side. And now Anthony, who's the seller, is freaking out because he sold what is determined to be a $540,000 house for 500. You think that transaction's going to take a little turn for the worse? I think so. Don't share the appraisal. It's none of their business. Okay. The only reason you should be sharing the appraisal is if it's less. Now, let's assume the appraisal comes in for 480. What the bank is now saying is they're willing to issue that 80% loan, 80% LTV on the value of the home or the sales price, whichever is less. So now we've determined the home is worth 480. Okay. So now they will issue 20%, or they'll expect 20% of your down payment on the 480. They will supply the other 80% on the 480. Yet you have now told the buyer or the seller, I'm sorry, that you're going to pay 500. So you bring 100% of the difference. Does that make sense?
No, not to me.
All right,
One
let's start
second,
over.
I'm just curious. I thought if it was a $500,000 house and they were putting down 20%, I thought that the appraisal only had to be like 425 or whatever to cover that. No?
No. It's got to be the sales price.
Right. So all right. Just explain it to me again.
Okay. Home is under contract for 500,000.
Right.
Buyer's working with a lender. Lender hires an appraiser. Appraiser comes out and appraises the home, finds the appraisal value comes back at 480.
Right.
Okay. So there's one step I didn't really describe. Let me make sure you're clear on that. You have a low appraisal at 480. So what you're going to do as the buyer side is you're going to share that appraisal form with the listing agent and therefore the seller, with a document that is called the amendment to amendment to reduce the sales price. And you would ask them to accept a price of 480. Okay. The seller then has the ability to respond. They're likely going to respond in one of three ways. The first way is by saying, okay, I'll lower it to 480. If that happens, the buyer is obligated to move forward at 480. They will bring 20% of 480. The bank will bring 80% of 480. The closing cost and everything else will probably be slightly reduced because now the home is selling for 480 rather than 500. With me?
Gotcha.
Okay. Option two would be the seller says, no, I'm not changing anything. If that's the case, the buyer has the ability to leave the contract and take their earnest money. So as long as all this happened between the number of days that you were given, remember calendar days.
Right.
Okay. And then the parties would part ways and that would be it.
All right.
Another response would be, hey, I can't lower it to 480, but I'll be willing to lower it to 490, let's say. Okay. From a contractually speaking, that is another way of saying no. And therefore the buyer could leave the contract based on the appraisal contingency and still retain their earnest money.
Gotcha.
So if the seller does not agree verbatim to lower the price to the appraisal value, as long as all that stuff happened before the end of the appraisal contingency, the buyer can leave and keep their earnest money.
Okay.
Okay.
But say they're like, you know what, I'm still willing to pay 5. So let's go to the table but how do they,
okay,
what money do they have to bring?
If the answer is no from the seller because they didn't touch the price or because they didn't come down to the appraisal value, the buyer does retain the ability to say, I don't care what the appraisal says, I'm willing to buy the home. Let's say the appraisal comes to 480 and there's no movement in the price from the seller. So now the bank thinks it's worth 480, you think it's worth 500 theoretically, right?
Right.
So you would, instead of doing 20% down and 80% loan on 500, you do 20% down and 80% loan on 480. Because the bank is only willing to finance off of a 480 value. The reason why you don't need the appraisal to just justify the loan amount is because they're giving you a break on private mortgage insurance because you have 20% equity.
I see.
If the appraisal came in at, let's say, 450, and you're like, well, I'm only borrowing 420 or 400, so what's the
Right.
problem? Now you don't have 20% equity,
I see. Okay.
right?
Bill, I
Yeah.
have a question. This is a question that was asked of me last week, and it was when there is a large appraisal gap, well, it was just when there is an appraisal gap, and that amount, do you require proof of funds for that amount?
I would, yeah. I would. I mean, I would probably, if I was the buyer, I wouldn't want any vagueness to exist. I wouldn't want any possible concern to exist on the part of the seller. So I'm going to go out of my way to find some type of documentation that gives the seller comfort that they're not going to have an issue with me finding that money or my buyer finding that money. If I'm on the seller side and this person's throwing out, oh, we'll make up a $50,000 appraisal gap. Great, show me. Give me proof of funds.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Now.
Hey, Bill, I have one question.
Okay, go ahead.
When you said something about calendar days, it's including the weekends, correct?
Yes, every day.
And
Calendar day, holidays,
because
everything.
if someone put an offer in, I'm like, hey, where's the earnest money? They're like, oh, this is not including the weekends. That's something that they would have to put in a stipulation that says, everything is based off of, I don't know what calendar that would be, but not including the weekends.
All days referenced in the contract are referring to business days, Monday through Friday, excluding Saturday, Sunday, and any federal holiday or something like that.
But that would have to be in a stipulation.
100%. 100%.
Okay.
Okay. So let's touch on one other idea with the appraisal then. So so if they bring the extra cash to closing, obviously they have to have the cash, right? But they are able to move forward with the contract. Okay. If let's say that's a 15-day appraisal contingency and day 17 happens and the appraisal pops in at 17 days and it's low, the seller is not obligated to do anything. So the default would be, okay, well, we expect you to close, and I don't really care how it happens, but we expect you to close. And if you don't, we're going to either sue you or keep your earnest money. So what happened here, right? That's another deadline that you and your buyer need to be concerned about. You're talking to your lender all the time. Hey, was the appraisal ordered, etc. Now, this isn't so relevant anymore, but eventually this will become more relevant. Is in a perfect world, what I'd like to happen is I wanted to get the due diligence period resolved before I instructed the buyer to pay for the appraisal. In today's world, you may not have time to do that. The reason I say that is, let's say, for example, I'm the buyer, Michael's the seller, and I just had an inspection, right? And it revealed that, we had a, mold in the basement, and we had some poly pipes, and we had a bunch of wood rot, and we had an active leak in the roof or whatever. There's a lot of things, right? And I submitted an amendment to address concerns for all those things. Okay. And maybe Michael's like calling a bunch of contractors to figure out how much all that would cost. And meanwhile, the appraiser calls, said, hey, we just got a payment from this buyer, Michael Gould, or I think I'm the buyer, this buyer, Bill Linkwald, who has ordered the appraisal. We're hoping to stop by tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock to appraise the home. If I was Michael, I'd say, well, I guess that mold in the basement wasn't enough to stop them from ordering the appraisal. They just dropped another $500 into this transaction. So they must not care that much about it. And I'd probably say no to everything they asked for. Does that make sense? So you got to understand you're playing poker every moment of the day, right? So ideally, I'd want all of that stuff to be resolved. Then I'll go order the appraisal. And I have fired lenders based on them screwing that up. Said, listen, do not order that appraisal until I say go. And the appraisal is ordered before I wanted it to be ordered. And that caused my buyer to lose out on repairs or closing costs or something like that. I'm like, hey, I told you I can't work with you anymore. We're done. I'm looking for A players. Is that being a jerk?
No, I just, that sometimes your window is pretty tight though there at the end. If you've only got 5 days due diligence or whatever.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I hear that. And if that's the case, you may have to order the appraisal on day one. And what I just said is irrelevant. But
Yeah.
when things get balanced out a little bit more and we can push out these contingencies a little bit more than we have to right now, that would be a relevant point.
Well, let me ask you this. Is due diligence different than appraisal contingency times? Are they separate?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And financing, it's 3 different time periods.
Okay.
They
And they're
run
not
concurrently.
related at all.
I mean, they run concurrently, like day
Right.
one for each of them
Sure.
is day one.
Yeah, that's still yeah.
I mean, they're related to the extent that I just described, but they're
Yeah.
3 different periods
Okay.
that
Okay.
aren't necessarily correlated with each other.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Was this helpful in terms of the
Yeah, I learned a lot today. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
So what we may end up having to do is just go through these bit by bit by bit. But the end result is that you guys are going to be masters of contracts. And you guys are going to be able to write offers quickly. You're going to be able to look, regardless of what side you're representing, you're going to be able to look for the handful of very important numbers on the contract and say, hey, I do not allow a seller to do this, or I do not allow a buyer to take this risk, or I explain the risk this way to a buyer in this type of situation.
Mhm.
Right?
Right. Love it.
It's like, you guys ever heard, like, I won't be able to tell you the exact story, but like a swimmer, let's say an Olympic swimmer, right? They have swam that route thousands, tens of thousands of times, right? So their muscle memory is perfect. They know how many strokes they're going to do before they hit the wall. So they know, for example, are they going to hit the wall with their left hand or their right hand based on how tall they are and how long the pool is and these kind of things, right? So their muscle memory, it allows them to, let's say their goggles fog or break or something like that, they can swim the thing with their eyes closed in an emergency like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have that same level of skill?
No, I do not. Not yet.
The truth of the matter is you're not expected to, right? Today. But you got to understand, there are people, this isn't directed at you, Michael, although it's going to sound that way. Your competition is studying every day. Your competition, hopefully, your competition is also expanding their network every single day. So if you let your competition prepare better or behave better, they have a better shot at getting the business.
Yeah.
So how committed are you to making sure that doesn't happen? All right. I appreciate all you guys sticking with me. And
Thanks, Bill. Thanks,
it's great to be
Candace.
back. And we'll see you in the morning.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bill.